bad. It's painful.
So nice to be with people who like to eat with each other enough to make sure that we can all make it and eat it, eat and enjoy. So good deal. Good stuff. Yeah. And they were good. They were very good. Nice little taco bar they had there at Clovis on Saturday. So good morning. Welcome to another action-packed episode of our Adult Sunday School. We are going through the Bible timeline and are in the year 1446 BC and are in the book of Numbers, chapter 33. And then we'll be in Exodus 15. But Numbers 33 is a more detailed itinerary of the stops along the way. That some things we don't get in the book of Exodus. So it's nice to put these together and get the companion verses all lined up. So 1446 BC, Middle Bronze Age, 2A going into B. China being led by Emperor Wai Ren of the Shang dynasty, their second dynasty after their Xia dynasty. Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt, your name here, now hiring. The Pharaoh of Egypt is dead. Dudamos II, drowned in the Exodus Sea, along with his son, who is the chariot leader after they'd lost his firstborn son and the other son's brother in the plague of the death of the firstborn. Dudamos II was of the 13th dynasty that's still in power, but not for very long in Egypt during their second intermediate period after the high point of Joseph's pharaohs in the Middle Kingdom and the later New Kingdom to come with King Tut and Ramses and all that. So that's the state of Egypt right now. Babylon in the Bible lands being led by King Amiditana, who is the great-grandson of Hammurabi, famous for the law code. We'll compare that with the law of Moses when we get there. So coming across in this Exodus and now on the other side of the Yamsuf Sea in the tribe of Judah, line of Christ, we have Aminadab. I'm thinking he's about 98 by now. And his son Nahshon is about 39, leader of the tribe of Judah. He's the 28th generation of Adam and is Boaz's grandpa. So all that brings us to, we are now on day 23 of our journey since departing Egypt. This is the 7th day of the second month, Iyar. This would work out to be about Friday, May 15th for us. So they are on their way to Marah. So let's take a look. Numbers 33, verse 8. Numbers 33, 8. They journeyed from Hahiroth and passed through the midst of the sea to the wilderness. And they went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham and camped at Marah. Couple items to note here in Numbers 33. One, some of our Bibles might say Pi-Hahiroth instead of Hahiroth. The actual Hebrew drops the pi. They just added it because other places have the pi. The pi refers to the mouth. That's going into those caverns that seem like caves. And so they came in through that mouth area and then came out on the other side. But on the other side is not the entrance, it's the exit. So it's not the mouth. So the actual Hebrew here in Numbers 33 rightfully drops that pi. It's not there. So they turned from Hahiroth, from the outside of the cave, and then passed through the midst of the sea to the wilderness that's on the other side. And they went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham. Notice it's called the wilderness of Etham. We'll see in Exodus, wilderness of Shur, and we'll see how these relate to each other. And they camped at Marah. So 3 days after the sea crossing, they end up in Marah. So that's what we're going to look at. And so a companion passage in Exodus chapter 15. Exodus 15, picking up in verse 23. So we can go back to verse 22 to capture everything here. Exodus 15:22 that we read last week. Exodus 15:22. Then Moses led Israel from Boundary Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah because they were bitter. For that reason, it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute and regulation, and there he tested them. And he said, If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight and listen to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. So we'll talk about that. So basically coming across the boundary sea, the Exodus Sea crossing, wilderness of Shur, it's described as in verse 22. Again, 3-day journey and no water. They came to this place called Marah. They couldn't drink the water because it's bitter, so they called it Marah. When Naomi, fast forward a few hundred years, when Naomi is bereaved of her husband and her sons, after she had went from Israel over outside of, and left Israel during the famine, when she was at this low point of her life, she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Marah, because she was bitter through that experience and that loss. Same word here. So the people are grumbling at Moses. Moses cries out to God. God says, go grab a tree. So he yanks out a tree, throws it in the water, and the waters become sweet that they're able to drink. And the Lord says through Moses, look, I'm telling you guys, stay with me, follow me, do what I say. I'll take care of you, and you won't be suffering all the things that I had the Egyptians suffer through. So he's going to provide for them. When waters are bitter, he'll make them sweet. So their tummies won't be upset. Too much of that going on in the world today. And so we see that the Lord is faithful in his provision as we follow his directions and instructions. You ever been trying to tell someone or guide someone or show someone something, and they're complaining it doesn't work, or they're unhappy, and you say, well, did you do what the instruction said? Well, no. Well, you can't really complain. It's not the instruction's fault if you didn't follow them. It's not God's fault if we don't follow him. And so that's one of the things we'll see playing out here a lot. So let's take a look here. So we are getting our itinerary courtesy of Dr. Glenn Fritz in his second book, The Exodus Mysteries, Midian, Sinai, and Jabal al-Lawz, which is the mountain range we'll be looking at. So the wilderness of Shur, we talked about this last week. So here is the Gulf of Aqaba, and here's where they landed on the other side. Actually, they walked across. And so we'll see this route they'll take from here, the Wadi al-Hasha. So here we see a mountain range called Shur, and south of that, this area, the wilderness of Shur. Shur, as we talked last week, referred to how the mountain appeared, sawtooth mountain range here, kind of shaggy and hairy. So that's Shur is describing how that looks. It's also Mount Seir, where Esau and his family, the Edomites, would be settling. And I got that backwards. Seir refers to how it looks, the shagginess and the sawtooth mountains. Shur refers to the boundary, the fact that it's like a chain that's a boundary here. And it's a very noticeable mountain chain with Egypt on one side and Assyria on the other, over 700 miles across. So when we're reading these phrases in the Bible, like Exodus 15, wilderness of Shur, that makes sense because here's Shur and there's the wilderness, so that's where they are. So when we're talking about Etham, now here we turn our heads a little bit, or think of it, here's the north, here's the south, here's the west, here's the east. This is a NASA image, satellite here. So you got the Dead Sea up here. So here's that mountain range of Shur. Here's the wilderness of Shur. Here's Nueba, where they crossed over. Now, Etham was the place where they had turned right before the wilderness of Etham. So here's this mountain range that they couldn't cross. They were going to go around like Moses did back and forth. But no, the Lord said, turn, come down here. And then he had them cross the sea. So Etham means coming down from the mountains. And we see that the mountains come right down to the seashore all along the ridge here, the north of the Yam Suf, Gulf of Aqaba, the Exodus Sea here. So the wilderness of Etham is on both sides. And on this side, the wilderness of Etham that Numbers 33 talked about overlaps the wilderness of Shur that Exodus 15 talks about. So it's the same place with some overlap here. Yeah.
The yellow highlight, is that a mountain range, or why is it yellow?
It's yellow, showing that this is the wilderness of Etham. They turned when they reached at Etham, right before the wilderness of Etham. They turned and came down through Pi Hahiroth, the mouth of the caverns or canyons, and came out here and then crossed the Exodus Sea right there. So Etham is this mountainous wilderness, and the word actually means, descent coming down from the mountains. And these mountains come right down to the water. And so, yeah, it's kind of a range on this side as well as on this side. Then further north, this is the mountain range of Shur. So this is the wilderness of Shur right before it. So wilderness of Etham, wilderness of Shur overlap each other. So this explains why Etham can be mentioned on both sides of the sea crossing. It's mentioned before they cross, and it's mentioned after they cross, because it's on both sides. So that fits and that makes sense. Is everyone comfortable with what we're looking at and considering here, the words in the Bible and how it actually plays out and what it looks like? All good? So moving on from here to Marah. To Marah. Let's see. All right. I get it. So here is what it looks like on the other side of the shore, looking back to the sea crossing that they crossed and looking around. And this is the road ahead of them, going up this Wadi al-Hasha into the wilderness of Shur. That's the road ahead of them. And that's the Exodus Sea crossing behind them. These photospheres are pretty cool. And there's some folks taking pictures. So the Wadi al-Hasha, this route that they took into this wilderness of Shur, this route moves steadily uphill. So take a look here. So here's where they came across on the other side of the Exodus Sea crossing. And so they're going to be going up following Dr. Fritz's red line here. So they're going steadily uphill. They reach an elevation of about 2,500 feet at a distance of about 9 miles from the beach. And then the route continues for another 8 miles. And then they get up as high as 3,550 feet at the headwaters of these different gulfs or wadis. The Wadi Jurafin, let's see, call this area right up here, the hill of Ash-Shiraf. So here's the path they took. So they're all traveling up around here, going uphill. So now they're at 3,500 feet up here to this area called the hill of Ash-Shiraf here. So the total mileage from the beach to this point is 17 miles. So they've gone 17 miles and 3,500 feet. So that phrase, Wadi Jarfin, means mother of two gullies. So we've got like a forked drainage here if we zoom out. This area was used a lot in the what's referred to as the Hajj. What that is, after the Muslim religion was invented in the 600s AD, 6 centuries after Jesus, when Muhammad invented the Muslim religion, and when Mecca and Medina became holy sites, one of the things they do is a pilgrimage to Mecca. It's a very important thing in the Islamic religion. And so the route that they would take in the desert here to get to Mecca is called the Hajj route. So some of these routes here in Saudi Arabia that we're going to see, Mecca and Medina are both in Saudi Arabia, as is Mount Sinai. We're going to see that these commonly traveled paths are similar. So they're going to be the routes that the Exodus folks are taking are routes that are going to be later used by Muslims making their Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. So these are practical, useful routes. So there was a report about this route in 1694 that said, hey, there's no water in this area. Well, that fits what the Bible says in the Exodus there. So at this hill here, this merges with what would later become a Hajj route called the Great Transport Route. And as we see, we turn and now we go southeast. So this path is now going to run downhill for 7 miles. And it's going to take us to the small settlement here, Al-Sharaf. So go downhill 7 miles. We lose 1,000 feet of elevation. So we're now closer to 2,400 feet here. This place, Al-Sharaf, was listed as a Hajj station that had no water. Again, just like we're told in Exodus, this area, not a lot of water here. So here are just a couple shots of this area here. and some of the residents. So yeah, pretty dry looking. And so they're coming along here to Al-Sharaf, which is this area here. And yes, we now have roads. That obviously were not there during the Exodus. And this is where they'll be making that turn. So now they're turning south here, following this new wadi that's called the Wadi al-Ifal. And they follow this because it's a wider path, it's not obstructed, and it takes them down to the lower elevations where odds are they're going to find more water. Keep in mind, too, Moses spent 40 years in Saudi Arabia, in Midian. So he's probably familiar with where the water sources are. And keep in mind also, they're not traveling without focus or direction. They still have God guiding them, the pillars of cloud and fire. So that's still happening. So the route continues downhill from Al-Sharaf now. So now we're going down here, and here is Marah from the Bible. So downhill from Al-Sharaf, following this Wadi al-Ifal, they go down about 10 miles and to this place, which is a confluence, different things coming together here, as we see here. So we got different paths all coming together here. This is the area of Marah. Now, again, remember, Moses didn't use map coordinates like we're used to. Moses referred to big areas. So this area here is Marah. And by the way, to get to Marah here, there's no way from the sea other than the route we just looked at. There's no diagonal corner. They couldn't cut across the mountain here to get to Marah. They had to come around on this path here to reach it. So here is Marah from the Bible. As you see, not a lot there. Yeah.
Does it say, or how long was manna provided?
We're going to talk about that. The short answer is manna is going to be provided here in a little bit, and that manna is going to be provided for over 40 years, because it's when they cross the Jordan and enter the promised land that the manna stops, which shows a couple of things, because agnostic David Roll, he has a natural explanation for the manna, and it's still there today. Well, that would be fine and dandy, except that disagrees with what the Bible actually says. The Bible actually says it wasn't there before, it was provided for a time, and then it stopped being provided. So there's no more manna to be seen today. So there's that. And on a personal note, when we as charter members of the Tehachapi Church were organized in June of 2000, Brother Steve Miller preached the charge message for us, and the theme of his message, the title of his message, No More Manna. The fact that, okay, we've been in mission and we've been, trying to get this thing going. Now we're taking ownership of it. It's for us to take and run with. So too, and his point was echoing this here, God provides, and he still provides, but now he's providing where we're at. And it's for us to put to use what he's placed in front of us. And that's why each church is independent. And yeah, we help each other and support each other in different things. But very, very important point that manna has a place in time and season, but then there's also time and place. Okay, you've arrived at your destination. Now take root, take hold, and now make it work where you're at. So that all makes sense. So great question on the manna. So the manna on our journey where we're at right now, the manna has not started just yet, but that is to come. So why does Dr. Fritz choose this place as Marah from the Bible? He's got a few different reasons. It's a 3-day journey from the sea, so that fits. So this identification of Marah here, being right here, zoom out a little bit. So here's the sea crossing. Here they are coming around to Marah. So 3 days journey from the sea. So this is 34 miles from the beachhead where they landed. So that works out to a daily travel pace of 11 miles a day. Now, if we may recall, on the other side, they averaged 15 and a half miles a day to go 272 miles across the whole Sinai Peninsula to get to the sea crossing. But in that situation, they were fleeing from the Egyptian army. Now, after the sea crossing, the Egyptians are gone and their pace likely slowed down. Also, remember, they had the 17-mile hike uphill from the sea, and there were limited water supplies. So that could have also slowed the travel pace a little bit. So going from 15 miles a day to 11 miles a day is reasonable. going uphill, not as worried about the Egyptians and all that. Another interesting thing about this area in Marah here, an explorer named Richard Burton, no relation to Liz Taylor, this old explorer, Richard Burton, he described this Muslim travel Hajj route going south from Al-Sharaf that we looked at to an area he calls Matlat, which means the salt slough. So the idea of a salt slough reminds us of the bitter meaning of Marah. So yeah, this was a bitter place. It had been dry, they hadn't had water. In Arabic, their language, they have similar words for bitter, such as mar or Marah. So it's Hebrew is a family language as well. Quick note here, Exodus 15:26, when the Lord told him, the diseases I put on the Egyptians, I'm not going to put on you. So we see this is God's divine providence here, showing that just as the waters were healed, God would be healing them if they would stay faithful to him. They could avoid the curses that were on Egypt if they stay true to him, which Egypt had not. Remember, Egypt, descendants of Ham, so they were descendants of Noah, so they had moved on away from God, and he's calling these people to follow him. So while you're in these treacherous environs, I'll provide for you if you stay close with me and follow my instructions. So that all makes sense? So to sum this up, getting from the sea to Marah in Exodus 15 and Numbers 33. So we've got an Exodus sea crossing from the Nueva beachhead. This would reach the Arabian shore near this wadi, and a wadi is like a valley where brooks of water sometimes appear and disappear based on the conditions. So they arrive on this side of the shore near the Wadi al-Hasha. This is the only path that leads inland that's suited to a multitude. Remember, 2.5 million people, men, women, children, flocks, herds, and animals, and wheeled vehicles and all that. There are no passable routes to the north, along the coast to the north, or to the south. So this is the only place they could have gone. The route brought the Hebrews from sea level to an elevation of 3,550 feet at the headwaters here, merger of different wadis, the Jurfan, and then the Wadi I Fall that they're going to take down. So they went uphill for 17 miles to get to 3,550 feet high. Then they turn right and start heading south. And this later becomes the Muslim travel route to go to Mecca, the Hajj. And so they're going down 17 miles, descending now to this area of Marah. And now they're at an elevation of about 1,935 feet. And again, Dr. Fritz places Marah here from the Bible based on this is 3 days travel from the sea. And this is a place where there would be water where there wasn't in the higher elevations that they were coming down from. So coming from the beach to Marah, going across this wilderness of Shur and wilderness of Etham here, covering a distance of 34 miles, coming around to here, about 11 miles a day. Also so sensitive. There we go. So now we're going to go from, so we see Etham corresponded with, on the Gulf of Aqaba, again, those mountains coming down to the sea. And so the wilderness of Etham was an extension of that. And the wilderness of Shur that we talked about also, south of the mountain range of Shur. So that was the wall that was also called Mount Seir that we talked about last week. So and this is an important point about where all this took place, as the Bible tells us, which is why we have to use the Bible as our source to be able to identify these things. The fact that the Hebrews entered the wilderness of Shur after they exited Yam-Suf, that shows that Yam-Suf has to be the Gulf of Aqaba, because this is where the mountain of Shur is. So if they're in the wilderness of Shur, they're over by the mountain of Shur, which is here by the Gulf of Aqaba. No other body of water fits that description that fits there. So this all fits nice, smoothly, and easily with the Bible. So that is Marah in the Bible. Everyone good with that? Any thoughts, reactions, questions on where they're at so far? Okay, 3 days in, lack of water, God miraculously sweetens the water down here at Marah, and they go from there. So where do they go from here? From Marah, they go to Elim. Exodus chapter 15, verse 27. Exodus 15:27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there beside the waters. And hold your place there. Companion verse, Numbers 33, verse 9. Numbers 33:9. They journeyed from Marah and came to Elim. And in Elim, there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. So a very similar verse there. So from Marah to Elim, that's this next leg of the journey right here. There's Marah. And Elim, we're going to see, relates to this area called all bad, which I guess is not all good. And so let's see here. So the Hebrews go south from Marah, following this Wadi al-Ifal, going downhill towards the known water sources. So they go down about 24 miles, and they reach this area of the modern day Al-Bad. So they're coming down along here, coming out of the mountains and hills, out into this area here. So there's the water at the bottom there. And so let's see Al-Bad. Here's some shots. So now we're getting closer to Midian, where Moses had been with Jethro. And there are some purported quote unquote caves of Jethro, and even a well of Moses in the area. And there it is. And we see the trees. There's the well, of course, tourist site there. And so that's what we've got for this area Al-Bad right here. So just give you kind of a zoom out. Again, we're from the north looking south. So there's the Gulf of Aqaba. And here they are coming down here out of the mountains closer to the water. And we're referring to this area here as Elim. So why are we doing that? So we're now at 820-foot elevation. So we've come down another 1,100 feet from where they were at Marah. On the Exodus route that we're looking at here, this is the first location encountered after the sea crossing that has a history of abundant water sources. It's very well known as water source. Now, as we read in those two verses there, the Hebrew word for Elim, that word actually means trees, with the idea of palm trees is just an assumption. Doesn't have to be palm trees. But the Hebrew word that underlies the 70 palm trees is not the word Elim, the name of the place. It's actually Tamar, which often refers to date palms, which there are lots of over here now. So that all fits. Well, here's kind of a thought process for the journey as they arrive here. Keep in mind, God told Moses to bring them to Mount Sinai, where Moses had conversed with God at the burning bush. So Moses is familiar with Mount Sinai, and that's where he's bringing the people. So he's bringing them back to Midian, where he had spent 40 years, and taking the same route he took from Midian to Mount Sinai when he would take the sheep. And so that's their destination. So if the Hebrews are seeking water resources and pasture for their herds, this general region would have been desirable in light of wetter climate projected during the Exodus, and also based on infrared imagery and topographical mapping. These low-lying areas of the Wadi al-Ifal coming down here to Al-Bad, this could have offered over 3 linear miles of water access and associated grazing. Approximate area of 2.5 square miles. So if we remember the size of the group, the Exodus multitude, Elim, we can see here, we can see as a large spread out district. Again, not compass coordinate pinpoints, but these areas for where they all spent time and hung out. So one more note here on the Bible words, some helpful details in the Bible references here with Elim. In the King James Bible, it says 12 wells in Exodus 15:27, and then 12 fountains in Numbers 33:9. But in both those verses, the actual Hebrew word underneath is ayin, which means spring, not a well. The Hebrew word for well is beer, like Beersheba. And so wells are constructed where springs are natural. So it makes a little more sense as they're coming here. There's a place of natural springs and provision, and it wasn't that there were a bunch of man-made wells here at this point in the Exodus. Artesian, yes. Yes. Like a metalhead, yeah. So a nice little oasis kind of refuge here in the midst of all this. So that is Elim. All good there? we are ready to move on to something very, very fascinating that is not in the book of Exodus. It is only in the book of Numbers. Let's go to Numbers 33 again. And this solves a riddle or a mystery. Numbers 33, verse 10. Numbers 33:10, they journeyed from Elim and camped by Boundary Sea. Well, wait a minute. We're several days away from the sea. Why are we camping next to it again? So let's talk about this and where this happened and why. And this is another reason showing the Gulf of Aqaba is the sea of the Exodus crossing, because here they are, they're following it on down. So they take a detour, and it looks like some, not all of the camp, some of the camp, most of the camp stayed behind, but there was something drawing their attention over here, something calling them over here. And so they have another encampment over here on the shoreline. So they come down to this area near Magna. So they come back to the sea after they'd been away from it for several days. So this is now day 27. So this is about a week after this sea crossing. They come to the coast here of Magna. Now, why would they come back to the water after they had gone through so much to get on the other side of it?
Fish.
Fish is a thought, sure. Downplaying there. Let's talk cool science. So this is 19 miles from Elim. So 77 miles from the sea crossing to come back around to it. So we're still going about 11 miles per day. So via this Exodus route we're projecting here, this Yam Suf encampment situated an overland distance of 77 miles from the beachhead opposite Nueva where they crossed, averaging only 11 miles per day. This point could have been reached in about 7 days, perhaps 8, depending on delays for watering and pasturing the herds. But the pace could have been faster because of the track for the previous 60 miles had been mostly downhill ever since that hill of Al Sharif. So 2 miles a day, 8 hours a day, works out to be about 15, 16 miles a day, realistic. So indeed, the idea of the immediate sighting of the dead Egyptians, whatever was talked about, when they crossed the sea, the waters came over them and they saw the Egyptians dead on the shore. Then we talked about other verses talking about them sinking. Well, which was it? Exodus 15:5, the depths have covered them, they sank into the bottom as stone. Exodus 15:10, the sea covered them, they sank as lead in the mighty waters. Nehemiah 9:11, referring back to this, the Lord threw their persecutors into the deeps as a stone into the mighty waters. Well, then how and when are they seeing them on the seashore? Well, many of the Egyptians likely had, as we talked last week, metallic armaments strapped to their bodies, and their horses would have been saddled or harnessed, connected to chariots. So the weight of these items, the driving force of the closing waters, would have caused the majority of the host to sink like stone, just as described. Makes sense. Now, I'm going to pause here for today, leave us in suspense. We'll pick up next week with what happened and what did they see here at this second sighting of the Exodus Yam Suf Sea crossing, and what this had to do with the Egyptians, how they were told that they saw them dead on the seashore, but they sank. So how is this going to work out? Yeah, I'll leave you with that cliffhanger, and we will find out with next week. And it has to do with CSI type science and what happens with bodies in the water and all that fun stuff. So with that, any other reactions or observations or questions on getting from the other side of the sea across to Marah and Elim and now to the Red Sea again? All good? All right, we'll pause for here, stop my screen share and stop recording, and we will pick that up next week. And for now, we'll go ahead and get ready to go before the Lord in song.